On Christmas Eve 1945, a tragedy struck the small town of Fayetteville, West Virginia. It wasn't the typical holiday misfortune. Instead, it was a mystery that would baffle the authorities, the media, and the entire nation for decades. It was the night when 5 children vanished without a trace following a suspicious house fire. This is the story of the Sodder family, their lost children, and the mystery that has never been solved. The Sodder family was a hard-working, tight-knit Italian-American family living on a rural farm outside of Fayetteville. George and Jenny Sodder were parents to 10 children, a family full of joy, laughter, and love. The Sodder children ranged in age from 5 to 23. On that fateful Christmas Eve, the family gathered for the holiday, unaware that their lives were about to be turned upside down. It all began around 10:30 p.m. on December 24th, when a fire broke out in the Sodder home. The fire was devastating, engulfing the house in a matter of minutes. But it wasn't just the fire that left the family in shock. It was the inexplicable disappearance of 5 of the children who were upstairs, asleep at the time. When George and Jenny realized the house was on fire, they acted quickly. George rushed to the telephone to call the fire department, but the line was dead. It would later be discovered that the phone line had been cut earlier that evening, adding to the list of strange events surrounding the fire. George and Jenny tried desperately to rescue their children. George attempted to drive his truck to the back of the house to rescue the kids, but the truck wouldn't start, something that had never happened before. It was a strange and seemingly coincidental series of events that left the parents helpless. While George and Jenny managed to escape the flames with their 4 younger children, the 5 older ones, Martha, 14, Louis, 9, Jenny, 8, Betty, 5, and Sylvia, who was just 2, were trapped inside. At least, that's what the parents believed. However, as they looked on in horror from the safety of the road, they heard nothing. No cries, no sounds of their children. It was eerily quiet. When the fire department arrived, the house was already reduced to rubble. But there was something odd. Despite the severity of the fire, the remains of the children were never found. In fact, no bones, no remains. Nothing was recovered from the fire's ruins. Despite the intense heat that should have left behind at least some trace of the children's remains, the authorities concluded that the fire was caused by faulty wiring. But George, suspicious of the investigation, was unconvinced. He believed the fire was set intentionally, possibly as part of a sinister plot to cover up the children's abduction. George and Jenny fought for answers, refusing to accept that their children had perished in the fire. They began investigating on their own, uncovering evidence that suggested the fire may have been deliberately set. There were rumors about a suspicious truck seen near the Sodder home that night, and some local residents reported hearing voices in the vicinity shortly before the fire broke out. One of the most chilling aspects of the case was the discovery of a mysterious letter that arrived at the Sodder home in 1947, 2 years after the fire. The letter contained a photograph of a young man who appeared to be Louis Sodder, one of the missing children. The image was postmarked from a foreign country, and while the letter's authenticity could never be confirmed, it only deepened the mystery of the children's disappearance. In the following years, George and Jenny's search for answers became an obsession. They spent years following leads, talking to witnesses, and conducting their own investigation. They even offered a reward for information leading to the discovery of their children. But despite their tireless efforts, no one could explain what had happened to them. One of the most disturbing aspects of the case was the apparent lack of a thorough investigation. Local authorities seemed to dismiss George and Jenny's suspicions of foul play, attributing the fire solely to an accident. Yet, there were numerous anomalies that made the accident theory hard to believe. For instance, the fire department had reported that the fire's intensity should have been enough to leave some trace of the children, but none was found. Some theorized that the children had been abducted, taken from the house before the fire had even started. Could it be that the fire was deliberately set as a cover-up? And if so, who would have done such a thing and why? As time went on, the case became a fixture of local lore, and national intrigue, the Sodder family never gave up hope. They continued to search for their children until the end of their lives, even after they grew old and frail. The mystery of the missing children haunted them for over 4 decades, and despite their best efforts, the truth was never uncovered. The Sodder case is still an open mystery. No one has ever definitively proven what happened to the 5 children that night. Over the years, the case has sparked countless theories, documentaries, and books, but answers remain elusive. In 1969, the Sodder family decided to take a bold step to keep the memory of their children alive. They placed a large billboard near their home, featuring pictures of their missing children and a plea for anyone with information to come forward. The billboard remained in place for years, a constant reminder of the mystery that still gripped the small town of Fayetteville. In the end, the Sodder family's pain and loss never truly healed. George and Jenny died without ever knowing the fate of their children. Their search for answers, however, lives on. The case has remained one of the most perplexing mysteries in American history, a haunting reminder of a night when 5 children disappeared without a trace, and no one could explain why. So, what happened to the Sodder children? Were they victims of a cruel crime, or did they perish in a tragic accident that defied all logic? The answers, if they exist, are buried in the wreckage of that Christmas Eve fire, and the mystery remains unsolved. As the years passed, the Sodder case became more than just a local mystery. It captured the attention of the nation. The media covered every new lead and every new development, but the answers never seemed to come. Each piece of evidence presented seemed to raise more questions than it answered. The letter with the photo of a young man resembling Louis was one of the most puzzling elements of the case. Was it a genuine clue, or was it someone playing a cruel trick on the family? Despite the overwhelming odds, George and Jenny refused to give up their search for their children. Even as they grew older, they continued to believe that their children were out there, somewhere, waiting to be found. In 1952, a theory was proposed that further complicated the mystery. Some suggested that the children may have been kidnapped by an organized crime syndicate, as George had made enemies within the local Italian-American community due to his outspoken views on crime and corruption. Could this have been a revenge plot carried out in a ruthless manner, using the fire as a cover? George himself was convinced that the fire had been intentionally set, and he believed that someone wanted to send him a message. His suspicions grew when he learned that the fire had started in an area of the house that seemed unlikely to catch fire naturally, fueling his belief that it was no accident. Over time, the case lost its prominence in the media, and the mystery of the Sodder children faded into the background of American history. But for the surviving members of the family and the residents of Fayetteville, the pain and unanswered questions remained. As the decades passed, new generations became fascinated by the story, and documentaries, books, and podcasts have continued to explore the case, keeping it alive in the public's consciousness. The story of the Sodder children's disappearance serves as a chilling reminder that some mysteries remain unsolved, no matter how hard we try to uncover the truth. As we reflect on the disappearance of the Sodder children, we are reminded of the enduring power of mystery and the lengths people will go to for answers. This tragic event continues to stir the imaginations of people around the world, raising questions about fate, family, and the unknown. We may never know what truly happened that night, but the memory of the Sodder children lives on, a story that will never be forgotten. If you have any information about the case, or if you know someone who might, don't hesitate to share. Sometimes the smallest clue can unravel the largest mystery. Thank you for joining us on this journey into one of the most perplexing mysteries of the 20th century. Until next time, stay curious and keep seeking the truth